frequent topic on this podcast is what we call well-centered fitness, or SPIES: spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social wellness. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age, with my co-host, Corbin Bruton. In this episode, we discuss how to use this simple but powerful tool to reflect on your whole person health each week. It's called the SPIES Check-In, a framework that can help you live with more intention, balance, and purpose for aging well. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health.
Dr. Armstrong, where did the SPIES model come from, and what's the idea behind it?
Well, the SPIES model, as we've talked about a few times on the podcast before, before we kind of get to why we call it SPIES, we'll just kind of go back to the idea of wellness. The first time I really dealt with wellness was as a grad student at the University of Toledo and having to teach a wellness class. And you promote, there's several different ways that you can identify the components or dimensions of wellness. I have just kind of settled over the years on spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. There are some who will include environmental and a couple of different other components to the wellness model, but I've just kind of prefer those five. I think they encompass everything that we need to consider. I have long identified it as what I call well-centered fitness, which the idea of being well-centered comes from being directed toward getting better at each of those, balancing those areas, not as a slice of the pie as wellness is often presented, but rather as interacting dimensions that kind of feed off of each other. And I actually promote the well-centered fitness as being more of a pyramid where the physical and the spiritual are at the base, and the interaction between those is what's going to lead to us being more intellectual, studying, reading more, learning more, and then that builds into the emotional and the social components, and that all feeds back to the spiritual and the physical. And so we have those kind of five components. And the SPIES comes from, as we've mentioned a few times, we're going to give a shout out to Jay, a friend of mine from way back to elementary school, who pointed out to me, it's like, are you intentional in the order in which you lay out the five components? And he says, because it spells out SPIES. And I am intentional in terms of how I spell it out, because I do think the spiritual and the physical are really the foundational pieces. And so without the spiritual piece, even the physical has less meaning to it. And so I always put it in that order, never realizing that it kind of spelled out an acronym. And so he identified the acronym. So we give him credit for the SPIES model. But the overall emphasis of SPIES is the whole person health versus just physical metrics. And we've talked about that a bit in the past with certain influencers that look at longevity as just the physical metrics, but neglect the spiritual piece.
Yeah, special shout out to Jay for coming up with this, because I think it sounds way better than well-centered fitness. No offense, Dr.
Well, you're
Armstrong.
wrong there, but
I just love the acronym SPIES. So let's start with the spiritual piece. What should someone reflect on here each week?
Well, I think, again, you have to first define what do we mean by spiritual, and spiritual goes beyond the religion. It is, and so for somebody who says, well, I'm not religious, so I'm not spiritual, I don't think there's a spiritual component. The spiritual dimension is the idea that there is something greater than self, that we are not the center of the universe. And so a key reflection that we would want to be focusing on in the spiritual realm is, how am I connected to the universe? Am I connected to meaning, purpose, or something beyond myself? And so this is where some of the mindful practices like meditation, prayer, getting ourselves out into nature and just experiencing nature can be practices that we can do to increase our spiritual dimension over the course of the week. Service. So when I'm considering my more meditative practices, my journaling, and I'm looking at I like the well-centered fitness. No discredit to Jay. I just think SPIES makes it easier to talk about. But the reason I like it as well-centered fitness is because it emphasizes that centeredness. SPIES doesn't necessarily capture that we want to be balanced in all these areas. And so one of the keys to doing a SPIES check-in is journaling on a regular basis, ideally daily, maybe multiple times a day, taking time out during the day to just reflect a little bit. And so starting your day with a little bit of meditation, centering ourselves, prayer, if that's, your flavor, taking a walk out in nature, looking at what am I going to do today to make a contribution to the world, to society. And when we're talking about making a contribution to the world, we're not talking about having this massive global impact. You don't have to be a world leader or celebrity to have a global impact, because just the interaction that I have with one person, if I can get up in the morning and smile at somebody, that smile may actually lead to that person changing their behavior, having a better day that impacts somebody else, And, I kind of think back to, and they're going to have Dr. Rob Kelly on a upcoming episode of this podcast, but I had him on we have a spiritual podcast, or we have a spiritual problem podcast. And Dr. Kelly is kind of the Gordon Ramsay of addiction therapy. Fascinating guy. I mean, I'd strongly recommend listening to that episode and then the upcoming episode. But one of the things he talked about, he said, I can see somebody on the streets and say, watch, I'm going to change this person's life. And just by commenting on his sneakers. And, you just walk by a person, hey, I like your sneakers. And you walk on. If you turn back, you're going to see that person kind of looking at their sneakers. They maybe smile kind of a little bit. And that person's going to go on. They're going to be friendlier to somebody. They're going to treat their wife differently, or their partner differently. They're going to interact differently with people because you've made them feel a little bit better about themselves. And that's kind of what we're talking about, some of these daily practices that we can do for our spiritual piece of the SPIES model. So it's really, start small, and, make daily goals and then track your progress over time. What are your thoughts? What do you do spiritually?
Well, I kind of, before I dive into what I do spiritual, I kind of want to capitalize on the little comments of compliments and random acts of kindness throughout the day. I had probably, I want to say kindergarten. We had a police officer that would come visit our school by the name of Officer Dan, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but he had such a huge impact on our community. And he would come and he'd work with us elementary school kids. And one of the things that he taught us was, just be super kind to others. And he used this example, if you're at a grocery store or you're at a restaurant and the person behind the counter is not doing good, don't get mad at them, don't get frustrated, don't embarrass them, because you don't know what they're going through on their own personal life. Maybe they're making mistakes on that particular day because they just got a phone call that their father is in the hospital and they can't leave their shift, so they're not able to go there. Get there right away. If someone shows up to school and they're falling asleep, don't make fun of them for being too tired. You don't know what they were doing the night before. Maybe they were in a situation where they had to take care of a loved one, and stress is a real thing, and it builds up and people handle it differently. And so those little acts of kindness, just being like, hey, I like your shirt, I like your hair, I like your shoes, things like that. It may seem so minute, but it definitely can have a huge impact. And I know this is a little controversial, because when I was doing personal training, I knew a lot of individuals that I worked with were also trying to hit their weight loss goals. And as a trainer, you have that eye for it, and you're like, hey, you know what, you're hitting your goals, you're looking good, keep up the good work. Although that's you're trying to be empowering. Some people don't want to hear that in a professional setting, but I think we should kind of eliminate that, my personal opinion, only because it's like I feel like we've gone in a way where we've hindered compliments so much and that they've become an HR violation. But I want to hear if I'm doing a good job, and I know a lot of other people want to hear if they're doing a good job, or if they put forth the effort to put on a nice suit jacket and hey man, you're looking sharp today. I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I think it definitely is a confidence booster, and I think we should move forward with going back to complimenting people and encouraging others to hit their goals and encouraging them. So I love that idea. I think we should be, the light of the world, which ties in with my spiritual beliefs. I try and wake up every morning. I try and do a little prayer devotion. And on my way to work, I'm listening to some worship music or some scriptures. And I, I used to, before finding my relationship, I was very lost, and I didn't know what my purpose was, and I didn't know where what I was doing. I just had this feeling of emptiness, and I had to do all these things. And now that I have that purpose, and I don't think like the world revolves around me or the universe revolves around me, but instead, I was created by a God that created everything, and he created me for a purpose, and to have a relationship with him in order to figure out what that purpose is. I think it's a wonderful, beautiful thing. And I think if you are not interested in that, that's okay. That's your freedom, spiritual freedom of choice. But I do think that everyone should have some form of relationship with God. And I feel like prayer is so easy, and it's free. Anyone can do it, and it doesn't take much. You just sit there and you have a conversation like you're having a conversation with your best friend, but you're just talking about how appreciative you are for the life that you've given and the opportunities that you have and the opportunities that are right around the corner and the blessings that are going to be coming in. And you just have these things, and man, it can be humbling experiences, it can be learning experience, it could be gratitude
If you're enjoying the Aging Well
with attitude.
podcast, be sure to
Anyways,
like,
sorry, Dr.
subscribe,
Armstrong,
or
I kinda
follow
went
on
on
your
a little
favorite
tangent, but I
platform so
hope
you will never miss
that
an
answered
episode.
most
And if you find
of
our
what you
conversations
just
helpful,
asked me.
please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing, and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast.
And then, but yeah, I think, and just having that journaling practice, that morning ritual of whether it's prayer, meditation, reflection, whatever it might be, can be highly beneficial in starting the day. One tip that I picked up from Renee Fitton, who represented El Nutra in a recent podcast episode, and she talked about doing kind of listing 3 things that she's grateful for every morning. I think is very beneficial. Just to, I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for this. And it just puts you in that attitude of gratitude.
So next, physical wellness. Beyond just working out, what should we really be looking at?
I think when we're looking at the physical dimension, we want to be looking at movement. We want to look at recovery. We want to look at nourishment. So diet falls into this, how much exercise we're getting, physical activity, but also our sleep kind of falls into that physical dimension. And so a good reflection question for somebody should be something like, did I care for my body in ways that support long-term energy and vitality? And again, we want to make sure that we're cautioning people that you're not to equate over-exercising or even exercising with health. That how much of your exercising isn't so much about health. It's why are we exercising? What is it doing to promote us physically so that we can support the other dimensions of wellness and be more centered and other centered in our kind of a universe.
So how do we keep our minds sharp and engaged, especially later in life?
Well, that brings us to the intellectual dimension. And, sometimes you'll see it listed as mental. I don't like the mental. I think intellectual works a little bit better because it does look at more the mental stimulation, the cognitive aspect of being well-centered. And so this dimension really stresses the importance of mental stimulation and curiosity. And so if we want to check in on ourselves intellectually, what are we doing to promote our brain and our brain health? So this could be things like reading, conversation, having regular conversation with people, challenging conversations, not just talking about what the Kardashians are up to, but talking about politics in a balanced, proactive manner can have stimulating effects. Talking about, if we're into the scientific literature, talking about research studies, talking about books that we've read, engaging in creative projects, so it doesn't always have to be totally intellectual. The intellectual dimension can also involve our creative side of the brain where, what are we doing creatively? Are we into art? Are we into music? Are we drawing? Are we writing? Are we journaling? What are we doing? And so a weekly reflection should be something like, did I challenge or feed my mind this week or today? Or how am I going to challenge my brain today? And it might just be, I'm going to set a goal of reading for 30 minutes today, or I'm going to listen to a podcast like the Aging Well podcast. What can we do to promote the mind? And kind of reflecting back on that, how well did I do that? What did I learn today?
One of the things I've recently learned is if you're having conversations with individuals and conversation is just kind of like a surface level, like, hey, how are you doing today? And someone says, good. If you respond back with the same word that they just said, but you flip it as a question, tend to kind of dive in more. So if you're like, hey, how was your day? How was your weekend? Good. And then you say, good. What makes it good? And then they kind of dive into it. And then you kind of get to know other individuals. You get to learn their thought process. You get to learn what makes them tick, what their passions are, what they're creative. And I don't know, it ties in with like a deeper understanding, which I'm sure we'll probably cover when we hit the social wellness portion of SPIES. But I just think it's absolutely fascinating. I'm currently working with the youth, which is the next generation, and I know the next generation, specifically that Gen Z, that Gen Alpha, they have a lot of negative, negative personas associated with them, but they're actually fascinating and they are so hyper intelligent and very, very smart if you actually break down. And I think breaking down those barriers, those generational barriers, and learning from them, just as a millennial, I can learn from the Gen X and the boomer generation. I feel like I can also learn from this Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and I feel like iron sharpens iron, and it's really, really cool picking the mind of these young, youthful, creative, intelligent individuals, and just I don't know, it's really, really cool. So that's something that I'm learning, and it's as much as they quote unquote have a bad rap, I don't think they do. I think this next generation that's coming up is going to be filled with inventors and entrepreneurs, and something that is going to change the world that we know. And it's going to be really cool, and I'm looking forward to it.
So you're kind of underscoring the interconnectedness between these dimensions because you really
Mm-hmm.
kind of jumped up to the social piece. But what are you doing intellectually? What are you doing to feed the brain? I mean, to learn, to grow intellectually.
Well, this is gonna sound kind of dorky, but I've been diving a lot into um literature out there, both scientific literature as well as historical literature. And I feel like this is just my opinion, but I feel like in order to help us understand the path that we need to go on in order to brighten our future, we we gotta look back into the past. And I think that yeah, I think understanding not just a part of history, but all of history is super, super beneficial. And then if we can tie in the science base to that, as well as a spiritual, aspect, it points us in a right direction. So for me, I've been doing a lot of cool historical facts and tying it with tying it within my faith as well as some science and tying that in, and just you know you as a professor at Western Oregon, you probably know the school Armada there, and those who dare to teach must never cease to learn. And I don't know, I just kind of live by that. I feel like it's pointless to stay stagnant with our intellectual horizon. I think we should always seek more information and absorb more and just grow and learn and mature. And yeah, I've been doing a lot of diving into history to keep my intelligence up.
So in short, you've been reading books more as opposed to just the internet.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, I think there's so many opportunities for us to tap into the knowledge base that's available to us. And that's the key to this area. So just like, what have I learned this week? If we kind of reflect back on the piece.
well, one thing I haven't learned, and I'll just say this before we move on, I am really trying to read these fiscal wellness and these financial things, because I want to prep for my future. And no matter how simplified I get, the most simple version of those books, it's like, I don't know why. It's like reading a foreign language to me, but I can understand, I can read a full-on scientific literature, and I can grasp that concept. But when it comes to financial investing, I just like, it's so funny how my brain works. But
Well,
yeah.
some might not find it too funny how your brain works, but but yeah, I
All
mean,
right.
the whole point is to stretch our intellect and not just read the things that we are comfortable with, but read the things
Right.
that we are uncomfortable with.
Well, yeah, because I feel like through that uncomfortable ability, just like in the gym, you need to push yourself through that last rep. And just because it's hard, you don't stop when it's hard. If you want muscle growth, if you want to activate hypertrophy, you gotta push yourself until failure. That doesn't mean that you push yourself until you're getting injured. But I feel like the same goes for intellectual intelligence too. Don't just do something because you're good at it. Do something that's going to challenge you so you become better at it. And so you can acquire a new skill set. And it doesn't just have to be reading. It can literally be doing a new skill at work. It blows my mind that people will literally say like, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. It's not in my job description." And yet those same people that say that are also the same people that are super upset that they didn't get a promotion when they were given this opportunity to learn a new task to become promoted. And they say, that's not in my job description. So then that door of opportunity closed for them and it opened up for another individual who did want to learn and grow. And now that person is getting promoted. And I think it's fascinating that we stunt our growth by staying in our comfort zone when really the growth is outside of that comfort zone. And we just got to have like I don't know, I don't even know what to call it, an emotional homeostasis of being comfortable by being comfortable with being uncomfortable, I guess you can say. And then that becomes the new norm. And now you've just grown and you've become better and you've just acquired a new skill set.
Well, that's a good segue into the next dimension, which is the emotional.
So this one is tricky for a lot of people. And what does emotional check-in look like?
Well, I think, for emotional is just being able to be a bit more self-reflective, look at how have I interacted with other people? How are they perceiving me? And, some of the key ideas in this area are naming our emotions. I'm angry today, or I'm happy today, or why am I, feeling what I am feeling, and being self-aware. A lot of people go through life not being at all self-aware of their emotions and just learning how to regulate that. And so if we can name our emotions, that gives us a greater capacity to be able to make the changes emotionally that are going to benefit us socially and within the other areas, the other dimensions. And so a reflection that we might do in our kind of daily, weekly SPIES check-in would be, did I acknowledge how I felt, or did I just power through? And so this is where journaling, breath work, and in some cases, therapy may actually even be beneficial.
I think that emotional intelligence and social intelligence or emotional intelligence and social intelligence are the two forms of intelligence that are completely overlooked. And I think that a lot of individuals are lacking emotional intelligence. Now, this can be for a number of reasons. This can be for psychological barriers. This could be for protective manners. But I think if one can understand their emotions and help regulate their own emotions, and if they can master that art, which is way easier said than done, fully understand that. But if one can get that, then that one becomes way more advanced than most of their peers, and they can also be used as a tool to guide and help those that aren't necessarily good with regulating or even understanding their own emotions. Part of emotional intelligence is social intelligence as well. So what about social wellness, especially for those who feel isolated or overwhelmed?
So when we're talking about social wellness, I think that the real important thing to consider is not the quantity of relationships. It doesn't matter how many friends you have on social media or Instagram or any of those. It's like the quality of the relationships, the meaningful relationships, the few but quality relationships that you have in life. So a reflection that we might want to consider in our daily or weekly SPIES check-in would be, did I connect with someone in a meaningful way this week? And, some of that, so we set goals for the day. It might be, who can I contact today, or who do I need to contact today to make a connection with them in some meaningful way that's going to boost their day? This is where that kind of I am third, other-centeredness comes into play. And so a prompt that we might give ourselves on a regular basis is, who energizes me and who drains me? And what am I going to do about those relationships?
Who energizes me and who drives me or who dulls me. That's something that I'm kind of experiencing right now. I was just having a conversation with my wife where I feel like I'm at the age where I don't want to be around individuals where once I hang out with them, I feel so exhausted. Simultaneously, I don't want to be around individuals where I might be the one exhausting them. I like to be around individuals where they are stimulating me intellectually, spiritually. They're pushing me, they're encouraging me, and vice versa. So being a part of that niche or that community where you're constantly giving and receiving and inspiring and encouraging and being encouraged all in once and finding that purpose, like I love that aspect of it.
We're the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with, as the saying goes.
Yeah. So if someone wants to start doing SPIES Check-In each week, what's the easiest way?
Well, again, I think the best way is to do what works well for you. First thing is how often. I would say pick at least one time a week. It could be, Sunday night as we're starting our work week, or Monday morning, could be Friday night, Saturday night, whatever day works for you to kind of be able to reflect and to position yourself going into the next cycle of time. So pick at least one day a week. There's countless ways you can do it. You can do voice memos. Most people on their phone, they can record and they can just, sit in their car and just reflect and record themselves. I prefer journaling. So I go through a lot of those composition notebooks over time. I have stacks of them from years of journaling. Don't know what I'm going to do with them. I don't know if I have some hope that maybe someday I'll live a life that some historians are going to want to go back through those and piece together my life. I don't know if that'll ever happen. You can use calendar note. The journaling works well for me because I could just in the morning get up before anybody else gets up, kind of reflect on the day before, what's coming in the day, set my goals. Again, lately I've been doing a little bit more gratitude assessment. What are 3 things that I'm grateful for, and just whatever first 3 things come to mind. The way I structure it is I'll just, I start with kind of my sleep. I've been tracking sleep, so those sleep scores. So I have data on that, so I can look back over time, see what's impacting that. Just kind of jump into what the day is going to be about, or, whatever I need to be reflecting on. I might set some goals, setting a goal for each of the 5 dimensions. I'll usually write out my mission statement, things that I value, and I have a few different daily mantras that I'll write to kind of set the tone for the day. One practice that I would like to get back to that I got to make the time. The time is there. I need to start at the end of the day, just kind of adding to my journal, do a second entry where I'm just kind of reflecting back on the day, just a few statements of positive things that have happened through the day. I used to kind of end with a quote that maybe came up from the reading that I've been doing. And, I do it on a daily basis. That may be too much for some people. Maybe it's just once a week. For my daughter, one thing that I bought her several months ago, and she hasn't done it as much as I anticipated, but she'll do it on occasion. She'll take the car out and I bought her a mic. She has a microphone, decent little podcasting microphone that she can hook into her phone and kind of videotape, record herself, and in a sense, kind of do a little self podcast. She's not going to ever produce that or publish that, but that act of just kind of recording and letting out any emotions and reflecting on those different pieces is highly therapeutic for her. And so I think for some people that might be the thing to do. Maybe it's just getting yourself a cheap mic and recording yourself, whether it's video, only audio, but just pretend you're doing the Corbin Bruton podcast, and you're just talking about what happened in the week. There's different ways that you can do it. Everybody's different. Their personalities are different. The key thing to remember is you're doing this SPIES check-in this is about noticing, not judging. We're looking at just kind of seeing where we are spiritually, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially, and not doing it in a more judgmental fashion. It's, oh, I didn't work out this week. I'm such a slacker and this and that. It's like, well, why didn't you work out? What's going on in your life that prevented you from getting your exercise in? Or when you did exercise, what was the benefit that you got from it? How did you feel? And how are your relationships going? If you're struggling, and I've had some struggles recently with just even family relationships, and really kind of facing myself, how my stressors are negatively impacting my relationships, and what am I doing about that? And one thing that I've been doing is I've already kind of promoted L-Nutra and Prolon, and any of our viewers that are kind of watching this can kind of jump down into the description notes and see links to where they can save some money on, their fasting mimicking diets, if I can spit that one out. Or if they need more long-term help, there's the L-Nutra Health that they can actually get consulting along with it. Again, not intentionally kind of promoting any of that, but it just kind of comes up that's one thing physically that has helped me. And I did mention Renee Fitton's gratitude part of journaling. But one thing that's been helping me is Rebalance Health taking their mints. I do the Mano mints during the day, try the mellow mints as well. So I kind of take about 4 mints a day just to help reduce stress. And honestly, it is at a huge benefit for me in terms of how much stress I have. And if I reduce that stress, how is that positively impacting my relationships? Where I'm getting upset less. I've not been out on the road as much to kind of see what it does for my disappointment with West Coast drivers and how horrible they are at roundabouts and driving on the highway. But it is causing me fewer outbursts. I'm a little bit more patient and understanding with other people. And that's causing me less stress, and it's causing less stress on other people. And so being able to track that and reflect, okay, when I've been doing these, I've been treating people differently. That's all part of the SPIES Check-In. It's not judging. It's not like, oh my God, I was such an asshole to people today. I'm just such a jerk. It's, why was I an asshole? Why was I being a jerk? What can I do differently today? One of my mantras that I use in my daily journaling is be your best today, be better tomorrow. And I can't do that in a judgmental fashion. I can't say, was I my best today? Maybe I wasn't my best overall, but did I do my best today? And if I didn't, what can I do better tomorrow? And that's where we want to be with this idea of the SPIES Check-In.
I think that's pretty, I would say, emotionally and intellectually mature, because a lot of people can't even handle feedback from a third party source. So the fact that you're able to actually give and receive feedback from yourself, I think that's really, really cool. Yeah, I can't tell you how cool I think that is. So good job, Dr. Armstrong.
Be better if I was doing better, but
well, I mean,
but again, I'm not supposed to be judgmental.
But that's the thing. It's be better than you were yesterday, and so it's almost like you have the ability, which a lot of people, if we're being honest, they don't. They don't have the ability to self-reflect and look back on the day through different situations. How could they handle it differently if they could go back in time, learn, grow from that, and then say, okay, tomorrow's a new day. I'm not going to stress about what happened. I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to grow, and I'm going to do even better than what I did yesterday, or I'm going to do better than what I did an hour ago. I'm just going to move forward. And so self-reflecting and self-reflecting with the ability to self-grow is, man, that's such a cool concept, which I know it happens to most of us as we mature, but for those individuals that can master that, I think you're leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of other individuals. And kudos to you if you have the ability and the wherewithal to actually to do that. Okay, so what's one thing that you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Well, there's probably actually a few things, but one is that balance doesn't mean equal. It means responsive. And so we're not always, the reason I don't like using wellness model as a pie is that it's not equal dimensions. At times we might need to lean a bit more into the spiritual or into the physical or into the intellectual. You're a college student right now. You're going to have to sacrifice a few of those other dimensions in order to perform well academically. And that's okay, as long as we realize that we're going to have to make up at some point for some of the detriments that we have accumulated in some of those other areas. And so it's just being responsive to the areas that we need and recognize that we need to grow in. And, start by noticing that one domain has been neglected and what can we do to that? So, if we're noticing that we haven't really given focus to our social connections, then maybe what can I do? Maybe I need to just call somebody. Maybe I need to plan a girls' night or a guys' night out, and what can I do to kind of tap into that area of neglect and boost it up a little bit? And, it's important to just recognize that whole person wellness supports aging well, not just longevity. And we've talked about that. We did our piece on Brian Johnson and how, his approach to longevity really neglects the SPIES model. It's focused almost entirely on the physical side. You might argue there's the intellectual side because he's learning things and trying to advance knowledge, but at the detriment to what? Is there a spiritual dimension to that? I see none. I might be missing something. And if I am, then my apologies for that. But I don't see a spiritual dimension. I don't necessarily see a social dimension because it's all about my longevity, not benefiting the world. And as I look at longevity, the reason I want to live longer is so that I can have the most impact for the longest period of time in my life. And I'm only scratching the surface of having any kind of positive impact. So I got to live longer to do some things that are much more positive. And so I would say for our listeners and viewers, try the SPIES Check-In for 3 weeks. Pick a period of time. Every Sunday night or Monday night, Monday morning, whatever it might be, just ask yourself 5 simple questions, one for each part of the model. And that might be the simplest way to kind of start aging well without adding more to your plate.
So I guess in conclusion, spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social wellness, the acronym SPIES, by following these protocol, you yourself can be a secret agent of overall wellness. And by doing so, self-reflecting, moving forward and getting better each and every day, these are all steps that you can do in order to age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.